As the Eurozone saga continues, the technocratic government of Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti has won an important vote of confidence in Parliament. Meanwhile, though, on the streets of Rome, and Athens for that matter, people have protested their new technocratic leaders, opposing what they call banker governments and the kind of economic measures that these technocrats want to see through. Now, in the United States, of course, yesterday, we also saw protests. Occupy Wall Street had a day of action with protests all over the country in New York, LA, DC. This was, of course, the culmination of 60 days of this movement. We ask, is this about more than protests on the streets? Is this really about financial war, financial repression? Well, that's what financial journalist Max Keiser believes. He's, of course, host of the very popular Keiser Report, which airs on RT. Now, here's Max taking that message to the streets of London just recently.
Financial repression. What does it mean? It means that savers, workers, people who live on pension accounts, people who need a high rate of interest to support their retirement or their standard of living, they're being forced against their will to subsidize speculators.
Now, from the streets of London to our studio, he described his position from the front line of financial war reporting, as he describes it. We interviewed him earlier. Take a look. Now, Max, you talk a lot about financial repression and using it as a weapon against savers and this war between savers and speculators. But for everyone to kind of get an understanding, what exactly is the war?
Well, to put this into context, think of the Jim Crow laws. Remember, in America, they had the Jim Crow laws, which were put in place, and you remember the signs, colored only for blacks, or white only for white. Whites sat at the front of the bus, blacks sat at the back of the bus. In America, they have financial Jim Crow laws. If you're a white Goldman Sachs partner, you can borrow money at 0% or less than 0%. Anyone else? You're borrowing money at 16%, 20%, 35%, payday loans annualizing at 300%. So they're using interest rates to create a two-class society. Those who are on the inside who get 0% interest charged to them, and everyone else who's basically an underclass, a permanent underclass in the United States and around the world, who are charged exorbitant fees to borrow money. That's almost a financial apartheid, if you will. And it's orchestrated on purpose to create this huge social divide for profiteering purposes. And
this is something that you are very outspoken about all over the world. And you've also been pretty outspoken about Eurozone and the technocrats there that are running Rome and Athens now. And I'm actually really curious your take on a leaked document that came out from Germany's foreign ministry, actually, that reportedly reveals that Germany is preparing for defaults by large Eurozone nations, with officials planning for a European monetary fund that would take ailing countries into receivership and run their economies. I actually want to bring our producer Dimitri Kofinas in to ask you about it.
Hey, Max, how you doing?
Great, Dimitri.
My question has to do with exactly that. Now, we know that Maastricht, which happened shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that was a treaty on European Union. It was arguably the most important of the treaties because it came at a time where Germany was looking to reunify. France was very concerned about Germany. And so they developed this next leg of the European dream to kind of bind Germany's legs and its feet so that it would not be able to do to the continent what it did since the time of Bismarck, and especially World War I and II. What do you see as far as Germany's new role in this financial kind of situation in Europe now? Are we going to see a bigger role for Germany, and should that be something that people should be concerned about?
Well, first of all, I think we need to get rid of this term technocrat, because we're not talking about technocrats. We're talking about bankers. These are bankers. They're unelected. They've been put in place to take over from democratically elected government officials. And these bankers all are connected to one banking organization or two or three banking organizations. And they're all looking to create this European-wide credit facility. They talked about it at Davos a couple of years ago, that they wanted to create these huge global credit facilities as a way to get a play on the global economy from banks that are operating outside of any sovereignty, any jurisdiction. And Germany, of course, they're playing this extremely well. And I think I'm the first one really on international television to talk about the role of Germany. They are, once you let the Teutonic genie out of the bottle, which is what's happening here, remember the euro, as you point out, was there to ameliorate the possibility of Germany, a reunified Germany, breaking out and stretching its legs as a superpower again. But now with the Eurozone breaking up, you have a reunified Germany. You have people talking about bringing back the Deutschmark. They have the Bundesbank ready to go. So you could see either Germany breaks out and you have the emergence of a superpower, Germany 4.0 as I call it, or they're within the Eurozone, but they're calling all the shots, and everything is going through Berlin, and effectively they're running the show in Europe. You know, Germany has always wanted to run all of Europe, and now they're clearly in that position. David Cameron's position is like Lord Chamberlain back in World War II. He seems to be appeasing the Germans. He seems to be unable to really articulate anything strong enough to say, we don't want you in this position anymore. And Germany is laughing. They're saying, yeah, well, we know the story. But I think this time they have dreams of getting it right.
Well, in bigger picture, what about the rest of the world? I mean, right now, speaking of banks, there's a report that central banks are loading up on gold in the third quarter. FT, the Financial Times, is saying it's because gold prices were so low in September. I'm curious why you think there's a gold rush.
Well, central banks know that the fiat currency era is coming to a close. The euro is going to break up. The dollar is looking weak. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is 47 years. And gold has always been the de facto go-to reserve currency in times of trouble. And central banks know that we're going to go back to a gold standard. Robert Zoellick's been hinting at it. Vladimir Putin's been talking about it. So this is in the cards now. It's on the table. And it makes perfect sense as a way to resolve this global debt crisis is everyone's got to write off these debts. And basically, they've got to do it against gold. So the price of gold will continue to go higher as both the reemergence as a reserve currency and panic buying. Because people realize when they see like a MF Global basically stealing customers' accounts. This is not using derivatives to create a Ponzi scheme, but just actually reaching in and stealing money. They're like, wait a minute, the whole system's breaking down. I better buy more physical gold. And even well-known pundits who should know better are being caught in the futures market when they should have physical gold.
You bring up a good point. I think you're talking about someone we were just talking to earlier this week. Sticking to this subject, we were also talking to James Rickards yesterday, who sees the entire future of the global monetary system as a race between SDRs, which are basically an IMF fiat currency, and gold. He sees gold as winning. I know you've talked to James Rickards about the G20 wanting to pawn Germany's gold. Do you see this as a race? And if so, who's winning?
Well, the IMF and the SDR will become a currency in which to roll up all these bad debts in an attempt to extend and pretend yet again. But it's going to be highly inflationary, and it simply won't work because you're not the underlying systemic problem of massive fraud. So Rickards, I totally agree with Rickards as he sees this thing playing out. His book, Currency Wars, is a fantastic read, and there's more talk, as a matter of fact, in Europe now. They are replicating the types of war games that Rickards talks about in Currency War that were conducted at the Pentagon to simulate financial wars and currency wars. Now, in Europe, they're doing the same thing. So this idea of using weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett called them, as actual way to antagonistically attack countries is getting more play. And we saw that in Greece. You know, Greece's big problem is that for every bailout package they came up with, for every $10 billion of bailout, Wall Street could create $100 billion in credit default swaps and swamp that market with artificial sell orders and just attack that market. You know, Greece was put out of business by financial terrorists. Same thing with Ireland, same thing with Italy, same thing with Spain. That's what we're dealing with here. Weapons of mass financial destruction in the hands of sociopaths like Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. These are the real terrorists.
And these guys. But that is not the end of the story from financial journalist Max Keiser. You'll have to stick around for that.